Words leave scars deeper than any blade. When Audrey's toxic boyfriend cornered her in a crowded VIP lounge to whisper that her chubby body was ruining his image, she shattered. She didn't know the most feared predator in the city was listening in the shadows waiting to claim her. Toxic relationships do not start with shouting matches or shattered glass. They begin with subtle shifts, quiet comments, and the slow, methodical erosion of a woman's confidence. For Audrey Evans, a 26-year-old architectural draftswoman working in downtown Chicago, the erosion had been happening for 2 agonizing years. Derek Mitchell was a junior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm on Wacker Drive. On paper, he was the perfect catch, impeccably groomed, ambitious, and charming enough to disarm a judge. But behind closed doors in their shared upscale apartment in Lincoln Park, Derek was a relentless architect of Audrey's insecurities. It started with casual observations about her portion sizes. Then it evolved into helpful suggestions about her gym routine. Lately it had mutated into outright contempt, disguised as brutal honesty. Tonight was supposed to be a triumph. Derek's firm was hosting its annual winter gala at the Drake Hotel, a glittering event filled with the city's elite. Audrey had spent weeks agonizing over her appearance. She had purchased a stunning emerald green velvet gown that hugged her curves she had once been proud of, before Derek's voice took up permanent residence in her head. Looking in the floor-length mirror before they left, Audrey felt a fleeting spark of beauty. Her auburn hair cascaded over her bare shoulders, and the dress accentuated the soft feminine swell of her hips. "Are you really wearing that?" Derek's voice cut through the quiet bedroom like a whip. Audrey froze her hands, hovering over her pearl earrings. "I thought it looked nice. The saleswoman at Nordstrom said the color matched my eyes." Derek adjusted his silk tie, his eyes raking over her reflection with clinical disapproval. "It's unforgiving, Audrey. Velvet catches the light on every bump. You look a bit heavy in the midsection. I just want you to look your best tonight. Richard Harrington is going to be there, and I'm up for senior partner. I need you looking like a trophy, not a liability." The spark of confidence evaporated, replaced by a suffocating tightness in her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to take the dress off, crawl into bed, and cry until her lungs burned. Instead, she swallowed the jagged lump of humiliation, grabbed her clutch, and followed him out the door. The grand ballroom at the Drake was a sensory overload of crystal chandeliers, clinking champagne flutes, and the low hum of old money. Audrey stood near a towering ice sculpture, feeling entirely out of place. Derek had abandoned her within 10 minutes of arriving, zeroing in on the firm's senior partners like a heat-seeking missile. Left to her own devices, Audrey nervously sipped sparkling water, her stomach growling. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, terrified of looking bloated in the velvet dress. Eventually, a waiter passed by with a silver tray of miniature beef Wellingtons. Unable to resist the gnawing hunger, Audrey reached out and took one. She had barely taken a bite when a hand clamped down on her wrist like a steel vice. It was Derek. His smile was perfectly plastered on his face for the benefit of the surrounding guests, but his eyes were flat and furious. He forcefully guided her away from the crowd, his fingers digging painfully into her bare arm, until they reached a secluded, dimly lit alcove near the coat check. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, dropping his charming facade the moment they were out of earshot. "I was just eating an appetizer, Derek. I'm starving," Audrey whispered, her voice trembling. "I literally just introduced you to Margaret Harrington 10 minutes ago, and now you're stuffing your face like you haven't eaten in a week." Derek sneered, stepping closer, so his perfectly styled hair loomed over her. "Do you have any self-control? Look at yourself, Audrey. You're getting chubby. Your waist is practically spilling over that dress. It's embarrassing. Put down the food, suck it in, and stop humiliating me in front of the people who pay my salary." The word hit her like a physical blow. Chubby. Embarrassing. Tears immediately pricked the corners of her eyes, hot and humiliating. She tried to take a breath, but the velvet bodice suddenly felt like an iron maiden. Her chest heaved, a quiet, broken sob escaping her lips. "Oh, for God's sake, don't start crying," Derek groaned, running a hand over his face. "You always make yourself the victim. Go to the bathroom, fix your makeup, and come back when you can act like an adult." He turned on his heel and strode back toward the ballroom, leaving her completely alone in the shadows. Audrey couldn't go to the bathroom. She couldn't face the bright fluorescent lights and the pitying stares of the other women. Suffocating under the weight of his cruel words, she turned and pushed through a set of heavy glass doors, stepping out onto a secluded stone terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. The biting December wind whipped through her hair, stinging her bare arms, but she welcomed the freezing temperature. It was a sharp, grounding contrast to the burning shame radiating in her chest. Audrey gripped the stone balustrade, leaning over it, as the tears finally spilled over, ruining her carefully applied mascara. She wept for the girl she used to be, the girl who loved her body, who laughed loudly and ate without calculating every single calorie. She wept because she knew deep down she didn't have the strength to leave him. Tears are entirely too precious to be wasted on a man with the intellect of a gnat. The voice came from the darkest corner of the terrace. It was a rich baritone sound, smooth as aged bourbon and dripping with quiet, lethal authority. Audrey gasped, spinning around and wiping her eyes frantically. "Who's there? I thought I was alone." A figure detached himself from the shadows. As he stepped into the pale wash of the moonlight, Audrey's breath caught in her throat. He was, without exaggeration, the most terrifyingly beautiful man she had ever seen. He wore a bespoke, midnight black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders with lethal precision. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the lunar glow, contrasting sharply with his raven-black hair. But it was his eyes that locked her in place. They were an impossible shade of piercing amber, glowing with an intense, predatory focus that made every primal instinct in her body scream at her to run. Yet she found she couldn't move an inch. This was Nico Ashford. Audrey recognized him from the covers of Forbes and the whispered gossip of Chicago's elite. He was the elusive CEO of Ashford Holdings, a billionaire venture capitalist who owned half the real estate on the Magnificent Mile. He was notoriously reclusive, rarely photographed, and rumored to be utterly ruthless. "Forgive the intrusion," Nico murmured, closing the distance between them with a grace that seemed entirely unnatural. His footsteps made absolutely no sound against the stone pavement. "I came out here to escape the agonizing mediocrity of small talk, only to find a tragedy unfolding in my sanctuary." Audrey crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly, intensely aware of her figure, Derek's cruel words echoing in her mind. I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford. I'll go inside." "Stay exactly where you are," Nico commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute directive that vibrated in her bones. He stopped less than a foot away from her. Up close, the sheer scale of his presence was overwhelming. He smelled of cold rain, cedarwood, and something electric like the ozone in the air right before a lightning strike. "I heard what he said to you," Nico said softly. His amber eyes flicked down to her waist, then slowly back up to her tear-stained face. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a terrifying, simmering rage directed entirely at Derek. Audrey looked away, humiliated. "You shouldn't have heard that. It's my fault. I gained some weight this year, and he's just stressed about his promotion." Nico let out a low, predatory hiss that sounded less like a sigh and more like a warning growl from a large cat. He reached out his long fingers, gently catching her chin and tilting her face back up to meet his gaze. When his skin made contact with hers, Audrey gasped. He was freezing. His touch was like dry ice, shockingly cold. yet it sent a jolt of pure, burning electricity straight down her spine. The moment his fingers brushed her jawline, her pulse skyrocketed, hammering fiercely against her throat. Nico's eyes dilated, the pupils swallowing the amber, until his eyes were almost entirely black. He stared at the pulse point on her neck, with a hunger so naked and intense that Audrey felt a flush of heat wash over her entire body. Do not ever defend a man who attempts to diminish your light, to hide his own insecurities. Nico whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His voice was hypnotic, drawing her in. You are not chubby, Audrey. You are luscious. You are vibrant. Every curve on your body is an absolute masterpiece, designed to be worshipped, not criticized by a pathetic little boy who lacks the capacity to comprehend true beauty. Audrey's heart stuttered. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this. Not ever. And how did he know her name? You're perfect, Nico murmured, stepping closer until his tall frame completely shielded her from the freezing wind. Your heartbeat is a symphony. Your scent. God, your scent is intoxicating. You smell like vanilla fear and something incredibly sweet. Before Audrey could process the sheer, bizarre nature of his words, how could he hear her heartbeat? Why was he smelling her? The heavy glass doors of the terrace swung open with a loud bang. Audrey, what the hell are you doing out here? Derek's angry voice shattered the spell. He stomped out onto the terrace, his face red with irritation. I told you to go to the bathroom, not wander off into the freezing cold. Get inside now. Derek marched forward, reaching out to grab her arm again. He never made it. In a blur of motion so fast Audrey's eyes couldn't even track it, Nico moved. 1 second he was standing in front of her, and the next he had Derek pinned by the throat against the brick wall of the hotel. Derek's feet were dangling 2 inches off the ground. Audrey screamed, backing away in shock. Derek choked his hands, clawing uselessly at Nico's steel grip. His eyes were wide with sheer terror. Nico didn't even look strained. He held a fully grown man suspended in the air with a single hand, his face a mask of cold, terrifying, aristocratic fury. Mr. Mitchell. Nico said, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper that seemed to echo off the lake water. I have a profound distaste for men who put their hands on women in anger. And I have an even deeper distaste for mediocre lawyers who pollute my city with their arrogance. Please, Derek choked out, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. I am Nico Ashford, the billionaire stated coldly, and you are currently employed by Richard Harrington. Richard owes me 3 major favors and a great deal of money. As of tomorrow morning, you will be fired. You will be blacklisted from every major law firm in the state of Illinois. If I ever see you within 100 feet of Audrey again, I will not ruin your career. I will simply erase you from existence. Do we have an understanding? Derek nodded frantically, tears of pain and panic streaming down his face. Nico released him, letting Derek crash onto the stone floor in a pathetic heap. Run! Nico commanded softly. Derek scrambled to his feet, didn't even cast a backward glance at Audrey, and bolted back through the glass doors, disappearing into the crowded ballroom. Silence descended on the terrace once more, broken only by the crashing waves of Lake Michigan. Audrey was trembling violently, her mind struggling to process the impossible physics of what she had just witnessed. No normal human being could lift a 180-pound man by the neck with one arm. Nico turned back to her. The terrifying predator instantly vanished, replaced once more by the impeccably tailored, deeply concerned gentleman. He gracefully shrugged off his heavy cashmere overcoat and stepped forward, draping it over Audrey's shivering shoulders. The coat enveloped her, smelling intensely of that intoxicating cedarwood and ozone scent. I apologize if I frightened you, little bird, he said softly, his amber eyes softening as he looked down at her. But I have very little patience for vermin. Audrey clutched the lapels of his massive coat, looking up at his impossibly flawless, pale face. The moonlight caught the sharp edges of his teeth as he offered her a small, reassuring smile. They seemed slightly sharper than average. "How did you do that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" Nico reached out gently, tucking a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. His icy fingers lingered on her neck, resting directly over her racing pulse. "I am a man who recognizes a treasure when he sees one." Nico replied, his eyes darkening, as he felt the heavy thumping of her blood beneath his fingertips. "My car is waiting downstairs. Let me take you away from this place, Audrey. Let me show you how a queen is truly meant to be treated." Audrey looked over his shoulder toward the glass doors leading back into the hotel. For a brief, terrifying second, she caught the reflection of the terrace in the glass. She saw the stone balustrade, the potted winter pines, her own shivering form wrapped in a massive coat. But Nico Ashford cast no reflection at all. Audrey blinked her breath, turning to white mist in the freezing Chicago's air. She stared at the thick-tempered glass of the hotel doors, her mind struggling to process the visual impossibility before her. She could see the reflection of the potted winter pines. She could see her own pale, tear-streaked face, and the massive cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. But the space beside her where Nico Ashford stood in all his towering, imposing glory was completely empty. A rational woman would have screamed. A rational woman would have dropped the coat, bolted through those doors, and hailed the first yellow cab on Lakeshore Drive. But as Audrey looked up into Nico's glowing, predatory amber eyes, she felt no fear. For the first time in 2 years, she felt entirely, unequivocally safe. "You have no reflection." She whispered the words, barely audible over the crashing waves of Lake Michigan. Nico's expression softened, a mixture of centuries-old sorrow and quiet amusement playing on his flawless lips. "Mirrors and glass backed by silver have always been a nuisance to my kind, Audrey. Silver represents purity, in the old texts a reflection of the soul. Since I traded my mortal soul for eternity a very long time ago, the glass simply refuses to acknowledge my presence." He didn't lie. He didn't offer a scientific excuse. He simply handed her the impossible truth on a silver platter. "You're a vampire." She breathed the word, feeling ridiculous on her tongue, yet entirely undeniable. "I am the king of the Midwest Territories, to be exact," Nico corrected, gently extending his pale, freezing hand toward her. "And you are freezing. My Maybach is idling on East Walton Place. Come with me. I promise you, on what remains of my honor, that no harm will ever come to you while you are by my side." Audrey looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of Derek, of the tiny, suffocating apartment in Lincoln Park, where she would be subjected to hours of gaslighting and emotional abuse. Then she looked at the apex predator standing before her, a creature of nightmares, who looked at her as if she were a goddess, descended from Olympus. She placed her trembling hand in his. The heat of his luxurious black Maybach was a welcome shock to her system. Nico's silent driver, a towering man named Alistair, navigated the icy Chicago streets with effortless precision. They pulled into the private subterranean garage of the Tribune Tower residences, a fortress of Gothic architecture and modern billionaires. When the private elevator doors opened into Nico's penthouse, Audrey gasped. The entire city of Chicago was laid out beneath them, through wraparound floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment was a breathtaking blend of sleek modernity and ancient wealth velvet sofas, priceless Renaissance tapestries, and walls lined with first-edition books. "Make yourself comfortable," Nico murmured, taking his coat from her shoulders. "I took the liberty of having my private chef prepare something. You mentioned you were starving." Within minutes, the sprawling marble dining table was covered in a feast that would have given Derek a synchronized panic attack. There was a steaming bowl of handmade lobster ravioli in a rich brown butter sage sauce, thick slices of warm, crusty artisan bread, a massive wheel of baked brie drizzled with truffle honey, and a decadent dark chocolate souffle. Audrey stared at the food, her stomach twisting with a toxic mixture of intense hunger and deeply ingrained guilt. I shouldn't, she whispered, backing away slightly. Derek was right. My dress is tight. I shouldn't eat carbs this late. In a flash, Nico was standing directly in front of her. He didn't touch her, but his sheer presence commanded the room. His amber eyes burned with a fierce protective fire. Derek is a parasite who fed on your insecurities to inflate his own pathetic ego. Nico said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Look at me, Audrey. She raised her eyes to meet his. You are a woman, not a porcelain doll. He told her, his gaze dropping to her waist, taking in the soft curves of her hips in the velvet gown. You were meant to take up space. You were meant to indulge in the pleasures of this world. Every curve, every soft edge of your body is a testament to life. To me, a creature who has lived in the cold and the dark for 400 years, you are the most exquisitely beautiful, vibrant thing I have ever seen. Now sit down, eat, and let me worship you exactly as you are. Tears pricked Audrey's eyes, but this time they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming relief. She sat at the marble table. She picked up a fork. And for the first time in 2 years, Audrey Evans ate until she was perfectly, wonderfully full, while the vampire king of Chicago sat across from her, watching her with a look of pure, unadulterated devotion. But the real world was not done with her. As Audrey finished the last bite of her chocolate souffle, her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out to see a frantic string of text messages from a colleague at Perkins & Will, the architectural firm where she worked. Audrey, what is going on? Harrison just got an email from Derek Mitchell. Derek claims you stole confidential blueprints from his law firm's servers, and that he's filing a police report in the morning. Harrison is talking about suspending you. The color drained from Audrey's face. Derek was making good on his need for control. Since he couldn't have her, he was going to destroy the career she had spent 5 years building. He was going to frame her. Nico noticed the shift in her heartbeat instantly. What is it? Wordlessly, she handed him the phone. Nico read the screen, his jaw locking tight. The temperature in the penthouse plummeted, frost literally forming on the edges of the windows. I told him I would erase him. Nico whispered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. It seems he is entirely incapable of learning. The next 24 hours were a surreal blur of absolute power. Nico did not let Audrey leave the penthouse. Instead, he made a series of phone calls in languages Audrey didn't understand. By sunset the next evening, the situation had been completely dismantled. Nico walked into the master bedroom where Audrey was wrapped in a silk robe, gazing out at the twinkling lights of the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. It is handled, Nico said, stepping up behind her and wrapping his freezing muscular arms around her waist. He rested his chin on the top of her head. I purchased a controlling 51% stake in Perkins & Will this afternoon. Your boss Harrison has been informed that you are untouchable, and you have been promoted to senior draftswoman. Audrey spun around her mouth, droppings open. You bought my entire company. It was a sound investment, Nico smiled smoothly. As for Mr. Mitchell, my forensic accountant spent the morning looking into his personal finances. It turns out Derek has been quietly embezzling funds from his firm's escrow accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. The FBI raided his apartment in Lincoln Park 3 hours ago. He is currently sitting in a federal holding cell. He will never practice law again, and he will certainly never bother you. Audrey was stunned. The suffocating nightmare she had been trapped in for 2 years had been entirely eradicated in a single afternoon by the man standing in front of her. "Why?" she asked, reaching up to touch his cold, marble-like cheek. "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." Nico leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the amber was swallowed completely by the pitch-black dilation of his pupils. "Because from the moment I heard your heart beating on that terrace, I knew you were mine," Nico whispered, his voice dark and heavy with centuries of repressed desire. "Vampires do not love as mortals do, Audrey. We do not date. We do not test the waters. We find our mate, the one soul whose blood sings directly to ours, and we claim them for eternity. You are my queen, and a king protects his queen." The intensity of his words sent a shiver of pure electricity straight down to Audrey's toes. She looked at his lips, at the sharp points of his fangs resting against his bottom lip. She didn't feel fear. She felt an overwhelming, all-consuming heat. "Then claim me," she breathed. Nico's breath hitched. "Audrey, if I bite you, if I take your blood, it binds us. It will heighten your senses. It will tie your life force to mine. There is no going back to a normal mortal life." "I don't want a normal mortal life," she replied fiercely, stepping closer so her soft curves pressed flush against his hard, muscular frame. "I want you." With a ragged groan, Nico swept her off her feet, carrying her to the center of the massive, velvet-draped bed. He laid her down gently, hovering over her like a dark, magnificent god. He didn't rush. He worshipped her. His cold lips traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck, down to the soft swell of her collarbone. Everywhere he touched her skin ignited with liquid fire. He praised every inch of her whispering adorations, against her skin, systematically erasing every toxic word Derek had ever planted in her mind. He made her feel lush, divine, and perfectly made. "You are exquisite," Nico murmured, his fangs grazing the sensitive skin right above her pulse point. "My beautiful, perfect queen," Audrey gasped as his fangs pierced her skin. There was a brief, sharp pinch, immediately replaced by a wave of pure, mind-altering euphoria. It felt like drinking a glass of the finest champagne while standing in the warm summer sun. She arched her back, tangling her fingers in his thick, raven hair, pulling him closer. As Nico drank, Audrey felt a dark, ancient power flowing back into her veins, a supernatural bond, clicking into place, fusing their souls together. The insecurities, the trauma, the shame of her past simply melted away, replaced by the unbreakable strength of a woman deeply, fiercely loved by a king. When he finally pulled away, his lips stained crimson, he looked down at her with a terrifying, beautiful devotion. The city of Chicago glittered in the background, entirely unaware that a new queen had just taken her throne. Audrey pulled him down for a kiss, tasting her own life on his lips, knowing with absolute certainty she would never ever be made to feel small again. Did Audrey make the right choice, trading a toxic mortal for a devoted vampire king? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this dramatic tale of supernatural revenge, true love and self-worth, make sure to hit that like button and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their true value. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling paranormal romance. See you in the next video.